Welcome. This is the TechWorks technical training for the Integrated Messaging and Reporting, better known as IMR, part 2 of our training series. I am Mark Dundas, and I will be your host. Before we get started, a bit of housekeeping. The audience for this training is anyone who wants to either design or install a TechWorks IMR. The TechWorks IMR is a very easy device to add to a TechWorks nurse call or clinic call. We assume that you already have some knowledge of what a CC2 clinic call or an NC series nurse call is. The IMR enhances those features through a bunch of things that it can do, which is covered in part 1 of this series, the systems overview. This is part 2. This is the parts and pieces, which there's only 2 parts, and the system wiring, which is extremely simple. You can hook up an IMR very easily. The challenge comes in getting it programmed correctly, which is part 3 of this series, which follows this immediately. If you want to follow along, there's a presentation guide available online at techworks-usa.com. There's also a certification test program available, and if you take all 3 parts of the test and pass, we'll be happy to provide you with TechWorks authorization as a designer and installer of the IMR. Again, this is part 2, parts and system wiring, the simplest part of an IMR. Let's talk briefly about adding an IMR and sharing relevant information. Why would you want to add an IMR? Well, because an IMR takes the button pushes and lights of our clinic call and our nurse call and puts them out as text messages. Any point on a system can have an associated text message built into the IMR, programmed into the IMR, that will go out and go to any phone, any carrier. Pocket pagers, for those that want them, it's very easy to add pocket pagers to a nurse call or a clinic call system. Tablets, for those that are using tablets in their clinics, TechWorks can add a graphic display and interactive push buttons to your tablet to provide limited system control as well as enunciation. Digital signage, very popular today. Graphics on the wall make it very easy for staff and everyone in a clinic to know where each other are. That's the key. That's what that's all about. Those lights, those buttons in a clinic call system or a nurse call system all show up on the wall and tell you where everybody is. Basically, the IMR takes the TechWorks product and connects it to anything IP so that PCs become not only system displays, but also admin workstation terminals. This is all controlled through how you set up your users. Any user, through their credentials and their password, has a unique display to that user and has access to only those items that they're authorized to have. The IMR is a very simple box. Everything is inside of this one box, and buried inside of it is a PC. There's actually a full-blown computer inside of there. It has TCP IP connections, RJ45, 568B connections are what we assume. It's 802.4 Ethernet compliant. There's 2 USB 2.0 connectors. Those are for connecting things like pocket pages or other serial device interfaces, but they also directly connect for a mouse and a keyboard if you want to plug one in here for some type of editing. Audiovisual, there's 2 connections. There's a 3.5 millimeter line level audio, as well as an HDMI connector for video and audio to a HDMI display. Data networking for the TechWorks data network is supplied via a green Euro connector, just like is on the clinic call, nurse call, and Clinical products. This is your RS-485 data transmit and receive, as well as your network power plus and minus. Over here to the right, you can't quite see it, but there's a switch that gives you a built-in terminating resistor if this happens to be the last item on the end of this RS-485 network. Power is provided by a 24-volt DC power supply sold separately. There's two barrel connectors over here on the right-hand side where you connect your power. And the reason for two is so that you can go off and feed something else if you cared to. These two barrel connectors are specifically for connecting an independent power supply to the IMR. It requires its own 24-volt power supply. The 24-volt plus is not connected to the network, so you can't plug a power supply into here and then backfeed power to your network. This is for connection of the data. You connect all four conductors, but the plus connection right here does not connect. It doesn't have any connection inside of the IMR. So you cannot power your CC2 or NC system from the IMR. You connect all four wires, plus and minus power, plus and minus data, or T and R, transmit and receive, but it does not provide power back to the network. You have to have a separate power supply to power the CC2 or NC system. The power supply is a PS2437B. It is 24-volt DC output. It is powered by 120 or 240-volt AC input, fully regulated, fully filtered, and has built-in surge suppression. We will not warranty our product unless you use our power supply because of the protection that this power supply provides to the IMR. Comes complete with a wall mounting bracket. It has the power for one IMR. How the IMR works. So you got your clinic call room status system or a nurse call. This would go on the annunciator line of a nurse call. Those CC devices are all connected to this proprietary network, this two twisted pair network, which you learned about when listening to the videos on the CC series. It connects to the IMR via this Euro connector, as we said. Again, when you connect your CC2 devices or your NC series network to this connector, it does not provide power back to your field devices. This is only a data input for the IMR. The power that is connected to the IMR powers the IMR. It does not power your network. The network needs its own power supply. Whether it's CC2, it needs a power supply. If it's NC series, the control module needs a power supply. They do not share the same power. The IMR needs a dedicated power supply. That connection provides all of the information needed to go to the network. So the IMR is sitting here listening to the TechWorks product, logging all of the calls in a SQL Server database, and sharing that information with the rest of the world out this TCP/IP port. All you have to do here for connectivity is plug in a Cat6 patch cable. So the entire wiring of the system is two twisted pairs to the TechWorks network and a Cat6 patch cable to the LAN. That's all there is. That's it. It's that simple to share data with the world. Let's talk about connecting to CC and NC. All you do is connect to the data loop of a CC system. There's your IMR. If you're on an NC system, you connect to the annunciator loop. That's the same two twisted pair data network on NC. Or you can connect to both. You don't have to have two IMRs. You could have one IMR connected to two systems. as long as you keep the addressing so they don't conflict, so that the IMR can tell which stations are the clinical and which ones are the NC. It doesn't care because it's the same messaging. They can connect to both at the same time. Two twisted pair, transmit, receive, plus and minus power. 24-volt DC, so it's the same as the network, but it is not powered by the network. It's powered by a local power supply. Just plug it in. That's all you have to do, and the IMR will do a lot of the rest. It won't talk to the outside world because it doesn't know what's on the TCP/IP connector. But by just plugging it into these devices, it learns all of the TechWorks devices automatically. So it'll build its own database. You just go around, push all the buttons in the system, pull all the pull cords. It will build its own database of what's connected to it from a TechWorks network. It will, however, require programming to connect from the TCP/IP out to the rest of the world. So let's talk about how it learns. It's sitting here on the TechWorks network, listening to all the network messages. Every time there's a button pushed, there's a message goes down this network, and the IMR hears it and records it. Each one of those button pushes becomes an event with a start, a stop, and how long it was active in between. So if this button was pushed and it was fast flashing, it would be recorded as to when it started, how long it flashed, and when it went off. Same thing with another button. You push a second button, it creates another event. It also logs that device address for this station in the database. A device is added to the point map every time it is pushed. So every time one of these buttons is pushed, it logs another device in here. Now, these empty columns, that's information that you can add to these points. Why would you do that? We'll talk about this extensively in programming. The more information you add in these blank columns that the IMR can't fill in, it identifies these points to people or places or events or functions within the clinic. So the more you program in here, the more information you can get out of it. Custom displays and digital signage are a big part of what people want. They love the IMR for the graphic output. These are all just HTML displays. There's nothing special about these. They are just a web page that you view in a browser. They're not any special app that you've got to load on the computer or anything. Any browser is a display. It can also be a terminal for inputting or working on the IMR if you have the credentials to log in through that browser. If you go to the home page, the display that you see can be the map, but it's not there unless you purchase it. The default HTML screen is this list mode. It lists all the areas in the building that you have identified, and it shows you the current status of any buttons or colored lights, whether they're flashing, unsteady, whatever. But this is the lights over here. This little legend is also something you program in. What's the purpose of each of these? And that's across the top here. This legend is over here telling you what the colors mean, and it's across the top. So this would be all the blue lights, this would be all the green lights, all the yellow and all the red in columns. Bubbles. This is another feature that comes built into the IMR, and what it does is it takes a group of rooms devices. So a group of room devices like the 4-color button and the dome light, and it puts them in a circle and it labels it. So these are the lights that are in that location. Just another way of displaying the same information. If you want custom graphics, you give us a purchase order, you give us the graphic itself, the floor plan itself. You tell us where these devices are located on the floor plan by address. You tell us how you want them labeled. We'll even do the labeling, exam 1, exam 2, exam 3, exam 4, whatever these rooms are called. We'll put that in for you. We'll label this stuff for you. If you tell us, then you simply upload that and you have a layout that then you can put on the display for users that have access to the layout. So every user, you define what they're going to see and how they're going to see it. The critical thing is the addresses. This goes back to that point mapping thing we were talking about. It tells us all of these points and their address on the network, and then the locations tell us where to put them on this graphic floor plan. If you use a touch panel like a tablet, you can add buttons. There's several different things you can do, but this would be like selecting between different floor plan views. You could click on this one and you'd get one floor plan. They'd click on that one and see a different floor plan. Who might want this? This would be maybe a nurse manager that's over all of the departments and needs to see different things at different times. If I'm only concerned about these few rooms over here in this corner, I would not have these buttons because I don't need to flip between different floor plans. Let's talk about sales and estimating of an IMR. An IMR takes some time and knowledge to implement. It's a very simple self-contained box, but there's a lot that you can do with it. Some of these systems can get very large and very complex very quickly. Plus, customers can require a significant amount of follow-up, add-ons, moves, changes, tweaking to get the thing to do exactly what they want to do. So just be aware that as you're pricing one of these systems into a project, you make sure you get enough labor to cover this. The basic system does not come with the floor plan maps. You have to buy those separately. So when you sell an IMR, it'll give you a display, but it's a very simple display of the calls in basically like looking at an annunciator, a hardwired annunciator. If you want the graphics, you have to get us a clean JPG of your layout, and you have to give us all the documentation of your point mapping, your device locations, et cetera, et cetera. Then we create the graphics and send them back to you. Always allow enough time to talk to your customer for discovery. You need to understand exactly how your customer intends to use this. What do they intend to do with it? Also, allow your technician lots of time to do the setup and the testing, because it's going to take multiple site visits. If this facility that you're putting this thing in is 2 hours away and you've got to make multiple trips to get this thing configured, you're going to have to build that into the project. There's a lot to this. It's all soft. There's only one piece of hardware, but there's a lot of software. It's very time consuming. Also, I can't overemphasize, read the IMR system guide and keep it handy throughout the project and throughout this training. That's all there is to it. That's all there is to the hardware. That's all there is to hooking it up. We are available 24/7, 365 at techworks-usa.com. There's all kinds of support, brochures, architect specs. We're here for quoting and design assistance. However, for technical assistance of any type, we hope that you have watched these training videos and read the installation manual and kept it handy, especially with an IMR. There is so much in an IMR that can be done, and there are steps you have to take to make it happen, that the installation manual covers in much more detail those items than I can ever do in a video. Once you've done all that, go ahead, give us a call for tech support. You're probably not going to have a lot of questions, but if you do, we're here to help. Thank you for your time today. And next up is part 3, the programming. The big part of an IMR is the programmable part.